One of the ways that we can study or visualize an ecosystem is by looking at an ecological pyramid. So there's an example here. We'll cover this in just a minute, but ecological pyramids are going to help us visualize and understand ecosystem structure. They also can help us understand energy flow and the relationship between the different trophic levels with respect to a variety of different factors. So our most common types of ecological pyramids are pyramids of numbers, biomass, and energy. So each of these pyramids shows the distributions between trophic levels. So in a pyramid of numbers, we're looking at the total number of organisms in each trophic level. For a pyramid of biomass, we are looking at the total amount of organic matter in each trophic level. And then for energy flow, we are looking at how much energy is transferred between trophic levels. Now, all three of these tend to be a pyramid shape because up at the top are secondary predator, tertiary predator, whatever they are, those guys are always going to be smallest in number, which means they're probably also going to have the smallest biomass compared to all other organisms. And I mentioned in a previous video that some energy is lost at each level. So that means those organisms at the top have far less energy, which is another reason why they are limited in their numbers and their biomass. So for a pyramid of numbers, our number of individuals is typically going to decrease at each trophic level. So our primary producers are always going to be our greatest in number. And that makes sense because the more organisms we have that are bringing in energy to the ecosystem, the more higher level trophic levels we can support. So this is sort of a standard or normal pyramid, smaller on top, wider on the bottom. In all terrestrial ecosystems or in most terrestrial ecosystems, we're going to see this normal pyramid. There are some odd cases where we would see an inverted pyramid, meaning that one plant is supporting a community. So for example, we might have, if we're looking at the community within an oak tree, we might have one oak tree that is supporting a whole bunch of insects. So for a pyramid of numbers, we might have an upside down one depending on the level of our community. But the larger the community gets, the wider the base is going to be because there are going to be more plants in that community supporting the higher trophic levels. A pyramid of biomass shows us essentially the weight of all of the living or organic matter in an ecosystem. So for example, in this pyramid below, we're looking at grams of biomass per square meter. So this would be usually a dry weight, and it could be measured directly or it could be extrapolated from data of a smaller area. But usually, again, our plant biomass is going to be the largest because those are the primary consumers. And if you just look around in nearly any environment, the most common organism that you're going to see is a plant. So it's going to be the highest in numbers, it's going to be the highest in biomass. Continuing with our oak tree example, an oak tree is huge and they weigh far more than the herbivores and predators combined, and especially more than any insects when you throw those in as herbivores or as predators. The example down here shows a freshwater ecosystem. So pyramids apply to both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems and any level of community within that ecosystem. So even in a freshwater ecosystem, the plants represent the greatest amount of biomass. In an ecosystem, we also have algae, cyanobacteria, and phytoplankton that are contributing to our primary production level, but they're going to be really tiny. Maybe you might have a lot of algae, but algae are still really small organisms, and so they're not going to contribute much to the waste, but they may contribute and will contribute to a pyramid of energy and energy in the ecosystem. So energy in an ecosystem, just like our food chains and food webs, demonstrate the flow of energy. So a pyramid of energy is always wider at the bottom because that's where our primary producers are. That's where our sunlight energy is entering the ecosystem. And we have tons and tons of sunlight that enters into any ecosystem. But also, every energy transfer loses a little bit of energy. So it makes sense that before any energy is ever transferred up the food system, food web, we have the most energy at the primary source. And then as we move up, some energy is going to be lost, and the higher we go, the more energy we have lost and the more energy we have in the organisms at those higher trophic levels. Energy pyramids are always going to be upright. Our other two pyramids might be inverted depending on the situation, but our energy pyramid is always going to be an upright pyramid. So I've mentioned several times that energy is lost between trophic levels. And you might be thinking, well, how much? How do we know how much energy is lost? Or how do we know what is the evidence that energy is lost? Well, within trophic levels, energy is always lost to maintenance and just maintaining the living functions of an organism. So some of that energy is going to be lost in the sense that it cannot be transferred up to the next energy level because plants are still doing the processes that keep them alive, and those processes require energy. So that energy is going to be lost and cannot be transferred up to the next energy level. But then also between energy levels, there's always energy lost in any transfer between trophic levels. And I mentioned earlier that is usually lost as heat. Energy cannot be cycled through a system. Energy is a linear flow through a system. So once energy is lost, it is gone. It is released into the environment as heat. And if we need more energy, we have to fix it back here by those primary producers. But only about 10% of energy is transferred to the next trophic level. We call this the rule of 10 or the 10% rule. And that means that of 1,000 kilocalories in plant energy, only 100 kilocalories is passed up to the next level. In this example here, we have 10,000 kilocalories of energy and only 1,000 available to the next level. And then only 10% of that 1,000 is available for the next level, and so on. So of the 10,000 kilocalories that plants fix into usable energy, only 10 kilocalories makes its way all the way up to that snake, or only 0.1% of the total energy fixed by that plant is brought up. And that is the main reason for our pyramid of numbers, biomass, and energy being so small at the top, because there's very little left to transfer once we get that high. And so usually we don't have more than 2 or 3 consumers after those primaries. We usually don't have more than 3 or 4 consumers because the energy that is available at those high levels is so small that it requires these top consumers to eat a lot of their prey species. And in order to for the ecosystem to provide them with that energy, they have to maintain very small population sizes relative to their prey.